If you have ever had someone with a famous last name laugh at your degree from a state school, stay with me. Because this is the story of how a man mocked my education in front of an entire executive board, built his future on my work, and never realized that I quietly owned the patent holding his empire together. My name is Lauren Whitfield, and for most of my life, I learned that silence is not weakness. Silence is often the last warning before everything collapses. I was sitting in the executive boardroom of Northline Dynamics, a room designed to make people feel small. The table was carved walnut, polished so perfectly it reflected the ceiling lights like black water. The glass walls overlooked the city's industrial district, gray, loud, and relentless. It was the kind of place where power lived comfortably, where careers were crowned or quietly erased. My hands were folded over my notebook, thumbs pressed together so tightly my knuckles hurt. I had learned to keep still in rooms like this. Stillness made people underestimate you. At the head of the table stood Connor Hale. He had been named head of innovation exactly 6 weeks earlier, a title created specifically for him by his father, Gregory Hale, the CEO, who sat 2 seats to my right. Connor was young, polished, and confidently careless in the way only people raised around power can be. He paced in front of the screen, clicking through slides that looked painfully familiar. The product he was presenting was called PulseCore, a wearable safety device designed to detect fatigue and microshock in heavy machinery operators before accidents happened. It was elegant. It was revolutionary. And every core mechanism behind it belonged to me. As Connor pointed at a stress dispersion graph on the screen, my stomach tightened. I had generated that curve 3 years earlier on an overheating laptop in a rented apartment, running simulations between double shifts. I remembered the hum of the fan, the burnt coffee smell, the quiet nights where failure felt permanent. Connor didn't know that story. He just knew the slide looked impressive. "This isn't incremental progress," Connor announced, voice smooth and confident. "This is a market reset. PulseCore positions Northline for a 9-figure valuation within 18 months. Investors aren't just interested. They're circling. And this time, we're the ones with teeth." The room nodded along. Executives leaned forward, drawn in by projections and polished language. They weren't listening to the science. They were listening to momentum. I was the only person in the room who knew exactly where that momentum would break. I cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but in a room engineered for acoustics, it landed hard. Connor stopped and turned toward me, his smile tightening. "Yes, Lauren," he asked, like someone humoring a misbehaving assistant. I straightened slightly. "The presentation is strong," I said carefully. "But on slide 11, the polymer casing you're proposing doesn't maintain stability under extended thermal cycling. After 48 hours of continuous use, the sensor array will drift. That creates false safety readings." The air shifted. I had committed the crime of interrupting the performance. Connor laughed, short and sharp, shaking his head as he looked around the table. "This is what I love about Lauren," he said. "Always buried in the weeds." He stepped closer, stopping just inside my space. "I appreciate the concern, truly. But you have to stop thinking like a lab tech and start thinking like a leader. In the real world, we iterate." "It's not theoretical," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I ran those simulations myself. If the casing degrades, operators could get hurt. The liability alone." Connor raised a hand, cutting me off. "This is the problem with state school thinking," he said casually, turning back to the room. "People trained in theory struggle with execution. Ivy League business programs teach you how to move fast. We can't let perfect get in the way of profitable." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed. It wasn't amusement. It was alignment. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I had learned long ago that men like Connor mistook quiet for surrender. Gregory Hale cleared his throat. "Excellent work, Connor," he said, pride heavy in his voice. "This is exactly the direction we need. Lauren, make sure Connor has whatever technical support he needs to finalize this. We need speed." His vision. Those words settled like ash. The meeting dissolved into handshakes and congratulations. Connor soaked it in, center stage, already celebrating a future he didn't legally own. I gathered my notebook and walked toward the hall. Connor was waiting. "You need to learn to read the room," he said quietly, blocking my path. "That comment back there? Not a great look." "I'm responsible for the integrity of the product," I said. "If it fails." "It won't," he interrupted. "Because it's mine now." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Honestly, Lauren, if you wanted people to take you seriously, you should have gone to a real school. You're out of your depth." He patted my shoulder twice and walked away, whistling. I stood there for a moment, humiliation burning, then turned toward the engineering wing. By the time I reached my lab, the heat had cooled into something sharper. I locked the door, walked to my desk, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was a worn folder labeled in my handwriting, "Whitfield Patent Archive." The documents were pristine. United States Patent Number 9,842,611. Adaptive Impact Response Matrix. Inventor, Lauren Whitfield. Granted 2 years before I ever walked into Northline. Connor thought he was standing on a podium. He didn't realize it was a trapdoor. I grew up in a household where nothing was handed to you. My father was an HVAC technician. My mother worked nights cleaning office buildings. College wasn't a legacy. It was a risk. Midwest State University wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable, and I worked my way through it waiting tables and tutoring. While Connor was networking at wine tastings, I was running polymer simulations at 3 in the morning on borrowed equipment. That grit is what led to the breakthrough. A mistake in a curing process. A temperature drop no one planned for. The material didn't crack. It adapted. It absorbed impact and redistributed energy. My advisor wanted to publish. I wanted ownership. I drained my savings and filed the patent myself. Years later, Northline hired me because they needed what I knew. During onboarding, HR slid a standard IP assignment across the table. I didn't sign. I added an exhibit. A carve-out. My patent. Gregory Hale signed it without reading a word. That signature was the quietest mistake he would ever make. And Connor? Connor never once asked where PulseCore came from. He just assumed it belonged to him. He was about to learn the difference between building a future and standing on someone else's foundation. The morning after that boardroom meeting, I knew something had shifted. Not inside me. Inside the building. When people avoid eye contact, it's rarely because they're busy. It's because they know something is coming and they don't want to be standing too close when it hits. I logged into my workstation and immediately noticed the change. My access to the PulseCore development folder was restricted. View only. No edit permissions. No uploads. Connor wasn't subtle. He didn't have to be. He thought he was in control now. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the gray notification on my screen. Then I smiled. Because people who panic always reveal themselves. I opened a backup directory that IT never bothered locking down. Buried 3 folders deep was a file labeled vision_draft_prototype. I opened it, and my stomach tightened. It was my graduate thesis. Not inspired by it. Not derived from it. It was my thesis. Same charts. Same equations. Same formatting. The title page had been cropped to remove my name and replaced with the Northline logo. Connor hadn't even changed the font. That was when I stopped feeling hurt. Hurt is a luxury. This was clarity. I started documenting everything. Emails where Connor referred to Lauren's matrix. Calendar invites where I taught the engineering team how the lattice worked. Version histories showing my user ID embedded in the core design files years before Connor arrived. I saved everything. I backed it up twice. Silence doesn't mean inaction. It means preparation. 2 days later, HR called me in. They wanted to adjust my compensation structure. The new plan removed my profit participation and replaced it with a flat quarterly stipend. $5,000. For a product Connor was promising investors would redefine industrial safety. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I thanked them and said I needed time to review the paperwork. That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Patent. Employment contract. Exhibit A, the revised agreement Connor wanted me to sign, demanding retroactive ownership of everything I had ever invented. If they truly owned it, they wouldn't need my signature. That document was fear disguised as confidence. I called my patent attorney, Elaine Porter, the same woman who helped me file when I was broke and terrified. Elaine didn't even finish reading before she looked up. "Lauren," she said, "they're in serious trouble." She explained it calmly, methodically. The carve-out was airtight. The patent predated my employment. PulseCore practiced multiple independent claims. And Connor's behavior? Willful infringement. The worst kind. I told her I didn't want to destroy the company. There were good people there. Engineers. Technicians. Elaine nodded, then slid the revised agreement across the desk. "They're already planning to destroy you," she said. "You're just deciding whether you want to survive it." We formed a holding company that afternoon. Whitfield Impact Systems. I transferred the patent portfolio into it immediately. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a licensor. Over the next 2 weeks, I became exactly what Connor wanted. Quiet. Helpful. Cooperative. I suggested refinements. I approved timelines. I smiled in meetings. And very carefully, I adjusted the final material specifications so PulseCore aligned perfectly with my patent claims. No ambiguity. No wiggle room. Connor approved every change without reading them. The investor summit arrived on a Friday night. A ballroom full of money and ego. Connor took the stage like a prince claiming a throne. He talked about vision. About leadership. About execution. When asked about the IP, he smiled and said Northline owned it outright. No licenses. No complications. I recorded every word. After the applause, Connor spotted me near the bar. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and introduced me as the numbers girl. He laughed about state schools. About theory people. About how this was the closest I'd ever get to seeing my work on a stock ticker. He said the lattice was brilliant. And that it was his now. I walked out onto the balcony, opened my phone, and sent one email. It went to the board. To legal. To the CEO. Subject line, notice of patent infringement and cease and desist. Attachments included my patent, my contract, and a formal demand from Whitfield Impact Systems. Halt the launch. Or we file for an injunction in the morning. By sunrise, the building was silent. Phones buzzing. Doors closed. I was summoned to the boardroom. Gregory Hale was pale. Connor looked like he hadn't slept. The outside counsel confirmed it. They didn't own the technology. Every unit shipped was liability. Every statement made was exposure. Connor yelled. Accused me of betrayal. Gregory asked what I wanted. I slid my resignation across the table. "This isn't an HR issue," I said. "This is business." The stock dipped. Investors panicked. 2 days later, Gregory asked to meet privately. No lawyers. Just reality. I brought Elaine. She brought leverage. A competing firm had already offered to license my patent exclusively. 7 figures up front. Gregory understood what that meant. Without PulseCore, Northline was nothing. We negotiated for hours. In the end, we formed a new entity. Whitfield Impact Systems held majority ownership. I became CEO. Northline licensed the technology and kept a minority stake. Connor lost his title. Lost his authority. He was offered a liaison role. At my discretion. 6 months later, I stood in our new lab, sunlight cutting across steel benches and testing rigs. My office had glass walls. The diploma Connor once mocked hung framed beside 7 patents. At a press conference, a reporter asked how it felt to finally be recognized. I told the truth. Ownership matters more than applause. Connor stood near the exit, clipboard in hand. No suit. No entourage. Just another employee. He asked if there was a future for him. I told him yes. If he learned to listen. If he respected the people who built what he sold. And now, if you're listening to this because someone laughed at your education, your background, or your silence, remember this. You don't need to argue with people who stand on your work. You don't need to scream to be powerful. Just make sure your name is on what matters. Because arrogance collapses quickly when it meets preparation. If you enjoyed this story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever been underestimated and waited for the right moment, hit like. And if you want more stories where entitlement meets consequences, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Silence isn't weakness. It's leverage.